let me start with Sri Lankan economic crisis. So, what is the issue? The issue here is there is shortage of foreign exchange reserves. Shortage of foreign exchange reserves. First, let us try to understand the issue. Later, we'll list out the reasons for this issue. So, when there is foreign exchange, when you have depleted forex reserves or foreign exchange reserves, you cannot import. You cannot import food and fuel. Sir, why Sri Lanka cannot produce its own food? Is the question that you might be asking me. That we'll get to there once we are listing out the reasons. The import of food and fuel is not possible. Why? Because country does not have foreign exchange reserve. If Sri Lanka has to pay any other country, it has to pay US or any other country, it should pay in US dollars or in the currency of that nation. Since the foreign exchange reserve is low, the import of food and fuel, definitely Sri Lanka does not manufacture fuel, so the import of fuel has also reduced. Since the import of fuel has reduced, there is 13-hour power cut in Sri Lanka. Can you imagine power cuts, 13-hour power cut? In a day, 24 hours, 13 hours power cut. More than 50% of the day, you don't have power. So how are you going to survive? And next up, the food that Sri Lanka was importing is not happening. Since Sri Lanka is not importing food, there is scarcity of food. Scarcity of food. Since there is scarcity of food, definitely once the goods are limited, what will happen to the price of the commodity? Price of the commodity will increase, and now we see inflation here. Okay, so this is the issue, and the people are finding it hard to even get one meal a day. Okay, now let us get to the reasons. Why is it that this is happening in Sri Lanka? Reasons. So, first reason is there was economic mismanagement by successive governments. The steps that the government took was completely ill-timed. Okay, so let's have a look at the economic mismanagement. What is the economic mismanagement? One is there is sustained twin deficit. So what is the twin deficit here? What does a twin deficit refer to? One is there is a revenue deficit, and one more is there is a current account deficit. You know, there are two kinds of account. One is capital account and one more is current account. Current account is where basically the export and import, that money comes in and goes out. And also revenue deficit. See, there are two types of deficit. One is budget deficit, one more is revenue deficit. In simple words, if I have to tell you, budget deficit is where this month, if I have to earn 10,000, but I have earned 9,000, then there is a revenue deficit. Then there is a revenue deficit. That is, I had to get 10,000, but I'm getting 9,000. Then there is a revenue deficit. Budget deficit means I have a budget of 10,000. I mean, I have an expenditure of 12,000, but I am getting only 10,000. So there is a budget deficit of 2,000. I hope you understood the difference in simple words. Okay, in simple words, I've taken myself as an example and I've explained. Hope so it is clear. There is a revenue deficit. Matlab, Sri Lanka is not generating enough revenue. Why is Sri Lanka not generating enough revenue? How does revenue of any country come from? Tax. So Sri Lanka did tax cuts. It promised tax cuts as its election manifesto. The government there, it promised tax cuts. So once the government cuts the tax, the revenue for the government falls. Why? Taxation is nothing but redistribution of wealth. You take it from the rich and give it to poor. That is the idea behind taxing. Okay, people don't know why they are taxed. Okay, tax is something that is good for the country. And next up, there is also a current account deficit. I've already told you the forex reserves have depleted. So there is a current account deficit. Here, what does this indicate? This indicates that the national expenditure is greater than the national income. That is, whatever the income that is for Sri Lanka, it is lesser than the expenditure that Sri Lanka has to make. Okay, and what does this mean? It means that Sri Lanka is not producing enough tradable goods. If the national income is lesser than the national expenditure, it means this country, that is Sri Lanka in this case, is not producing enough tradable goods. And also, I've already told you, because of these tax cuts, there is a revenue deficit. There is these tax cut accelerated the economic crisis. Okay, India is trying to expand its tax net. Why? Because India wants everybody to be under the tax bracket. Okay, if you are earning, then you should file IT return. You should file because you should come under the tax net. Okay, all that. Next up, the tourism industry took a hit. This was post the church bombings that happened. People got scared to visit Sri Lanka. Post the church bombings, as soon as Sri Lanka started to recover, there was COVID-19 pandemic. There was COVID-19 pandemic, and also next, the remittances, they dropped. You know what are remittances, right? What are remittances? Yeah, residents of Sri Lanka, they were in other country and they were sending money to their family members or their country. Okay, and this remittances, it took a drop. There are a lot of reasons attached for these remittances, and I was actually going through one of the articles in which I saw that this drop in remittances has increased the Hawala network. That is because of the actions taken by Sri Lankan government. It devalued Sri Lankan rupee. Okay, so one of the reasons is because devaluation of Sri Lankan rupee. First, let us try to understand devaluation, post which I'll tell you how exactly the remittances drop. Devaluation of Sri Lankan rupees. So what is devaluation? Suppose today $1 imports will drop. Why imports will drop? Because Sri Lanka has to pay more now. Okay, and since this currency was devalued, people got scared. What? Those who are remitting money from abroad, that it is only, I mean, the value of the currency is more. These guys are devaluing. But if I go through Hawala network, I will get 250 rupees for $1. I don't need to go through Sri Lankan bank, and again, if I go through Sri Lankan bank, again there is going to be a cut. For this also, Sri Lankan government took a measure wherein they started to incentivize remittances. They said if you remit the money directly into Central Bank of Sri Lanka, you will be getting 8 rupees, 2 rupees as incentives. Why? Because Sri Lanka wanted to recharge its foreign exchange reserve. How is it going to do it? Remittance is one of the way wherein the foreign exchange reserves can be improved. Okay, so this is with regard to the devaluation of Sri Lankan rupees. Okay, once the export increases, I mean, but there was inflation because of this. There was inflation because of this. There was inflation. See, remember, whenever there is devaluation, okay, there will be inflation. Going forward, and if we have a look at the financial status of Sri Lanka has a foreign exchange reserve as of Feb. I'm speaking as of Feb 2022. Sri Lanka had foreign exchange reserve of 2.31 billion US dollars. This is what is left. But Sri Lanka has to repay repayment to various international organizations, other countries. This year alone, Sri Lanka has to repay 4 billion US dollars. So clearly there is a shortage there. Yes. And also one more reason for this economic crisis is Russia-Ukraine conflict. Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Invasion of Ukraine. What has this done? This has increased oil prices around the world. Increase in oil prices. Once there is increase in oil prices, Sri Lanka is already in an economic crisis. How can it import more oil? Okay, these are the reasons. Okay, now how is India helping? How is India helping? What is the help that Sri Lanka has got from India? Help from India. The first, I mean, the recent help that India provided was diesel shipment of around 500 million US dollar credit line. That is, India gave a diesel shipment. It is valued at around 500 million US dollars. This is given as a credit line. Why? Because fuel is very important. If there is no fuel, then there is no power. If there is no power, then there is no work. If there is no work, then the country is crashing. Yeah. And also, India has provided $1 billion US dollar line of credit using various facilities. The 400 million, this includes the 400 million cash swap facility and a lot other things. This is what the financial assistance that India has provided to Sri Lanka. Now, what are the lessons that we learn from this? Lessons for India. What do you think are the lessons for India? Lessons for India. This can be a potential question. So what are the lessons that India can learn from Sri Lankan economic crisis? So the first lesson that we need to learn from that India needs to learn from this is engaging with neighbors. It does not mean that you engage with top-notch leaders or you engage with leadership of the country. Engaging with neighbors means you should engage with opposition parties also, opposition parties in other countries also with the civilians you engage. So engagement with neighbors not only means engaging with leadership of the country, it means you should engage with the opposition party and there are other key players, be it private stakeholders. You should engage with everyone. Why? Because 2 weeks ago there was Sri Lanka had a different PM. Now recently Sri Lanka got a new PM, Ranil Wickremesinghe. ಸೊ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ವ್ಯಕ್ತಿಗಳು ಶಾಶ್ವತ ಅಲ್ಲ, ಕಿರೀಟಗಳಷ್ಟೇ ಶಾಶ್ವತ. Okay, KGF2 dialogue. Okay, going forward. Then there was domestic mismanagement of economies. All South Indian, all South Asian countries. If you have a look at South Asian countries, now all South Asian countries are facing political instability, be it Pakistan. Pakistan has got a new PM, be it Afghanistan, occupied by Taliban, or even in Nepal, the new PM, yeah, Sheikh Bahadur Deba, replaced PM Oli, KP Sharma Oli. And also, if you go to Myanmar, 1 year ago, there was a military junta. And now in Sri Lanka, there is an economic crisis. So all South Asian countries, all South Asian economies, there is vulnerability. They are vulnerable to economic crisis again. Okay, why? They're because they are vulnerable to triple whammy. What exactly is this triple whammy? Vulnerable to triple whammy. So we are seeing a situation wherein because of three conditions that all the South Asian countries, they are vulnerable to economic crisis. One is because definitely the pandemic, the global pandemic, and next there is a global slowdown, global economic slowdown. Is it there or not? Okay. Next up, the third thing is because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Because of Russia's invasion. Because of Russia's invasion, the prices of oil has increased. Any country, all the country needs oil. Which there is list one country that does not require oil for its growth. So this is the issue with regard to most of the South Asian countries. Okay, and India has to monitor the situation. When there is political instability and economic crisis, please remember this, when there is political instability and economic crisis, our neighboring countries, they are vulnerable to powers like US and China. Because China, this is nothing but debt trap of China. Now China is also giving money. Again, China is giving money. Why? Because it wants more. You give more debt, it means you're going to acquire more, in simple words. Yeah. So political instability and economic crisis, this makes our neighbors, that is neighbors of India, more vulnerable to powers like US and China. And India cannot afford this. Okay. And also, if you have a look at one important lesson that you can learn from Sri Lankan economic crisis is populist measure. Okay. Basically, they were a populist leader. What exactly happened is, if you get back to the issue, there was one reason that I missed out. Okay. One reason, that is, see, I said there is food shortage. Food shortage. So why was there a food shortage? Because Sri Lanka, in an effort to become organic country in a rapid way or in a very short term, Sri Lanka banned import of fertilizers. So when the import of fertilizer, and this move was reversed. Later they realized, okay, it is not going to happen now. This is definitely damaging the country, and definitely this move was reversed. But the effect was felt once there was a ban on fertilizers, the production of crops decreased. So once the production of crops decreased, this includes production of rice. So once the production of rice decreased, Sri Lanka went to a position wherein it had to import even rice. And Sri Lanka is a major exporter of tea to the world. Almost 15% of Sri Lankan export basket is made up of tea. Okay, so this export of tea, how is even tea? They need fertilizers. So the production of tea also dropped. This is one more reason why there was an economic crisis. And now I hope you understood why there is a food crisis. It was because of this move wherein the Sri Lankan government banned the import of fertilizers. But there is one more reason that people attach it for this ban of fertilizers. That is, other countries, they say that Sri Lanka banned import of fertilizers because Sri Lanka is not in a position to pay for fertilizers. Most of the countries, they import fertilizers. Even India imports fertilizers. Okay, most of the phosphatic fertilizers is from China. Phosphatic fertilizers, it is from China. So this is one more reason that there is a food shortage. And getting back, so what do you understand by this? Populist measures. Who is a populist leader? One who has like this mass following for like Siddharamaiah. Siddharamaiah is a very popular leader. That is because of the schemes that they provide. They provide affordable schemes. That is, they provide. Siddharamaiah was providing Annabhagya. Yeah, that is, he was providing rice at a very this thing, 1 rupee per kg or something like that. Okay, so even in Sri Lanka, to appease the people, to do some appeasement politics, Sri Lankan populist leader, they gave social security benefits. That is, they gave free food, free water, free. And how is government going to pay? How is government going to pay? So again, there is a revenue deficit. So all these issues come together. And once this populist leader lose power, India should understand that good governance, not popularity, is better guarantor for political stability. That is good government, not populist measures. Okay, guarantee political stability. In India, at the center, we have some political stability. Past 20 years, at the center, in the state, it keeps changing. Karnataka has not had a stable government from past 5 years. We have already had maybe 4 or 5 CMs now, 4 CMs. Yeah. So once there is no stability, try to understand this. Once there is a drop in political stability, okay, the yojanas or programs of the government cannot be implemented, or schemes of the government, they cannot be implemented on full scale. Okay, why? Because there is no political stability. So now I hope so you got an idea of what exactly happened in Sri Lanka, how the country is suffering. Now again, how can Sri Lanka come out of this? Sri Lanka is requesting IMF, that is International Monetary Fund, to bail it out, and definitely IMF will help Sri Lanka. It comes with clauses, strings attached. Okay, so that's it about Sri Lankan economic crisis. I hope so you understood it clearly. Any doubts?